Hi, I'm Jackie from Travelling Thread Co. We're so excited you've chosen our kits. Come on, let's get creative. The first step in getting this project started is to make sure you have your fabric marker and that you have your beautiful little clips, or you can use the pins that came with your kit. Our lining comes with a beautiful little snip in the halfway point for you to fold both pieces together. Got a beautiful fold down one end, all the way up to match each other really nice and neat at the top. We are going to need to mark about a 4 to 5 centimeter opening at this top part here. I'm going to put a marking at the 0 and the 5. I'm then, with my seam ruler, going to measure our seam allowance, which is 1.2 centimeters. That's also a ½ inch. And I want to measure from the edge 1.2 centimeters as well. That's my pivot point. I'm doing that on both of the top raw corner edges. Okay, now that I've marked that, I've got a pivot point and I have a gap in the middle to be able to turn it through. A really good way to mark that gap and make sure you don't sew through it is to get some pins, and you're kind of wanting to pop them in, knowing that you're not going to sew past that point, and then showing yourself where you're going to pick up your sewing from the other point. You're going to be stitching from one folded edge, skipping a gap and stitching down to the folded edge at the bottom. At your machine, we're going to do one of two things. We're going to be clipping down our sides to make sure that our fabric stays nicely in place while we sew. My machine has a ½ inch marking on its plate. If yours doesn't have that ½ inch marking, I'd recommend at this point to make sure that you mark a 1.2 centimeter allowance in and rule a line so that you have something to follow. I'm clipping my edges to make sure I can keep it nicely in place as I sew. I'll be doing that to my other side as well. At your machine, make sure you're in a straight stitch with your stitch length of between a 2 to 3, closer to the 3 if you can. We're going to start stitching from our folded edge, and we're going to run up to our pivot where I'll direct you on what to do next. You're either going to follow your traced line of the seam allowance or the line marking that comes on your base plate on your sewing machine. Starting right at the bottom, right where that beautiful fold is, I'm actually going to use my hand wheel to just do a stitch forward, 1 to 2 stitches back to make sure I've caught that back part, and then another stitch or 2 forward. I feel like then my fabric's not going to get all eaten up. You might even need to sort of pull your back threads a little bit as you start to go. We're then going to stitch down the entire length of the heat pillow lining. Remove any pins or clips as you go. I'm getting close to my pivot point. I'm going to use my hand wheel to get myself as close to that point. It turns out I'm right on it. Make sure your needle is down into the fabric before you lift that presser foot. Pivot your fabric around because the needle's holding it, so it's not going to get shuffled or moved. And then as soon as you've lined it up again, lower the presser foot straight back down. To sew up to this needle, I'm going to back stitch a little bit, then forward again. Then I'm actually going to just pull my fabric through, do a back stitch, and continue to pivot and sew all the way to the other side. I've backstitched and raised my needle up. I'm going to lift my presser foot. It'll drag. See how I'm still attached? It'll drag it along. I'm going to lower it at my next pin where I need to have left my gap and continue to sew. Backstitch so it doesn't sort of come undone when you're trying to fill it with beans and then stitch it closed later. We're sewing to our next pivot point. Leave the needle into the fabric, lift the presser foot, turn, line it up properly, lower your presser foot, and continue to stitch all the way down to the bottom of the lining. You have now successfully stitched from one fold of the lining to the other. We have left a little gap. You can get your beautiful snips. Snip that on both sides, because that is going to be the opening that we're going to be able to turn our lining through. So I'm going to show you how to practice your zigzag stitch so that you have a nice finished edge. We are not going to zigzag where the opening is. I'm going to start at the fold again, and we're going to zigzag stitch all the way down the side, and we're going to do exactly as we stitched with our straight stitch. I'm basically looking at where my needle is, and it's going to be doing a side to side stitch, and I'm just going to aim to go right down the middle of that side. I'm going to do a similar thing with a pivot, leaving my needle in, pivoting only along to this part here, and I'm actually going to lift that, drag myself along, pivot again, straight down the center again. I've gone ahead and trimmed down right close to my beautiful zigzags, and now we've got nice clean edges. Just snip where I zigzagged. We can turn this in the right way. Trim your threads and we'll turn it in together. I've given this a really nice press. We now have our lining and we've got a beautiful gap that we can fill with beans. We have marked on each of our kits for our heat pillows little notches. I'm going to fold it at that little notch. That becomes my fold, and make sure that that little bottom notch also has it. You can opt to press this with your iron, and you can also finger press it down. That second notch, when we fold it, it's going to beautifully enclose any of those raw edges. And I'm going to use a few sweet little clips to make sure it's all beautifully in place. What we're going to do is the same thing to the other end. There's once again some little notches on each side to help you match it up. Okay, beautifully folded. So we're calling that a double fold. This is where the magic starts to happen. On our machines, we're going to do just a nice edge stitch down one side, holding that fold into place. We don't want to stitch it down this part because then that will be all flappy. We want to get it close to this beautiful folded edge here. It's really important to make sure you return your machine to that straight stitch setting. I'm going to use this little line to guide along the folded edge of my fabric. Straight stitch all the way down. I'm going to back stitch and there we have it. Just a beautiful edge stitch. Let's do the same to the other end. Another one, beautifully stitched. Now both of our ends are finished off nicely. So always with our right or our pretty sides facing. So you can very clearly see this is the wrong side of the fabric. Our pre-cut fabric comes with those beautiful notches again. So we're going to find the notches to mark where our first fold point is. Match those, do a nice fold. That's a relatively long fold. So you'll find those notches sort of just off center of the main long piece. There's also another shorter notched fold. You'll see where these two little notches are. We're going to also fold it at that point there. So shorter overlapped piece, folded at the notches and placed down. Longer overlapped piece, folded at the notches and placed down. At this point, I'd recommend to use pins to hold just this wider sort of structured, like a thicker part together. So I've basically got each one nicely held down so it's not going anywhere now. We're going to clip our sides together, or remember, if you do not have a marking on your machine to follow for the seam allowance, this is a good point in the project to mark in your seam allowance with the beautiful fabric pen in your kit. And that way you'll have a line to follow if you need. We are just going down each side because we've got beautiful folded ends. We've already finished our two raw ends off to overlap, and we're just going to put our seams in place now to finish up our heat pillow. So as always, I'll start a little bit further from the edge. I'll always do a stitch or two first. I'll do my reverse stitches and then sew straight all the way down to the other folded edge. As we go over this thicker part, you'll need to pull your pin out. Remember, it was holding them together, so just guide with your fingers, making sure they don't sort of smush apart as you go over the top. Make sure you're doing a nice reverse stitch to hold in place at both ends. One side done, let's do the other side. I'm going to snip any loose ends. I'm going to switch my width to 3, leave my length at 3 and switch to a zigzag setting. And using the same idea from the lining, I'm just following straight down the middle with my zigzag stitch. I've now done my zigzag stitch. I'll do that all the way down the other side. Take your time now to trim down all of your loose ends. And we want to trim down each of the sides close to the zigzag as well. Here we have it, our beautiful finished heat pillow. You may have overlocked those, or you may have used pinking shears which cut that zigzag pattern on the raw edges. However you've done it, we are ready to turn it in the right way. You might have a pencil that's kind of blunt, or some sort of knitting needle, anything that sort of can turn those edges without obviously you pushing it through the fabric. At this stage we have our lining piece still with the gap opening, and we have our beautiful outer. This is your base for your heat pillow. We recommend pearl barley to fill your heat pillow. Something else beautiful at this point, if you have any dried lavender, we've done that in some of our Learn to Sew classes that we've run, and it's beautiful when it heats up in the microwave as well. At this stage, that's when to add everything in. We like to machine stitch this closed. This is actually where I would say the pins come in really handy. I can see where my gap starts and where my gap finishes. I want to make sure that I start sewing before that gap and I continue sewing further down past that gap. I'm shuffling down to the bottom here. I'm placing the part that I want down in the bottom, right in the corners.